Thank you for joining us today on our podcast, Money on the Rocks. This podcast is designed to help you as a Canadian citizen understand what's going on in the world that might affect you. So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the tariffs that are going to be implemented on Tuesday, March 4th. We are currently filming this on Monday, March 3rd, and hopefully it can get out to you in time so that you're able to understand the nuances of what's happening with the US tariffs. On today's episode, we're going to be talking to my friend John Aruldison. He is a real estate lawyer, a developer, a real estate broker. He is a very well-spoken individual and makes learning a lot of these topics, I find personally, very interesting. So this podcast is specifically designed to help teach Canadians about economics, policies, and politics, and try and make it digestible and somewhat entertaining. Some topics can be really dry, but I will do my very best to make sure that it's something you at least have a couple laughs during. So stay tuned, and I hope you get a lot of benefit from this podcast. Let's talk about the tariffs because, the first time we did this video, they were implementing and then got canceled.
Yep, and then there's a hold period.
A hold period.
Yeah.
And now they are in full effect as of tomorrow.
Yeah, that's as of, I would say, like 3 hours ago. The latest news that came out of the White House is apparently they're on for tomorrow. We'll see if they actually happen, or if they do, how long they stay. But as of right now, when we're filming this, they are scheduled to start tomorrow.
That is Monday, March 3rd.
Yes, yeah. So we are, Tuesday, March 4th is when they're set to start. Yep. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about what they are, first of all.
So I think everyone has heard the word tariff probably a million times over the last month, right? But, for those that haven't, a tariff is essentially a tax, right? That is placed on a consumer good or service that is either leaving a country or coming into a country. So it's essentially crossing a border is when that tax is placed on it. Tariffs have been around forever, as long as countries have been trading. They have been strategically used to try and raise the prices of a foreign good in a domestic market, but really ever since the late 80s, early 90s, the world has moved towards more free trade, right? Where the elimination of tariffs, there's a couple of reasons that the world has moved in that direction. The idea is it's you have countries doing what they're the best at doing, right, versus one country trying to do everything, and allowing those goods and services to flow across borders made things cheaper. Also, the idea that countries that work together are more less likely to go to war. They're more stable. So that economic interdependence. So these are all the reasons that we move towards a free trade system over the last, I'd say 20, 30 years or so now. But as of tomorrow, there's a change in course on that idea. So yeah.
And so why do you think that is? Like, what is the rationale behind it for Trump to be placing tariffs on arguably America's best ally?
Yeah, I don't know, if I'm going to be entirely honest, because I don't want to speculate what goes on in Trump's mind, and I think a lot of people in the world try to, and no one really knows. Sometimes I'm not even sure if Trump knows. It's just that day of the year or that day of the week or whatever. But I think they're rooted in some beliefs, right? So I think one belief is that I'm not saying this is correct, but I think Trump believes that America has lost out on a free trade environment, right? So if you think of, like, say for example, the production of aluminum in the U.S. The U.S. has been notoriously not competitive in the production of aluminum, and as a result, they need a lot of aluminum to build everything that they have, build all their military equipment, all that stuff. So they need a lot of it, but they can't produce it themselves. So it's now been outsourced to other countries, and they buy it from other countries, and that domestic market has disappeared. And you have a lot of people that feel slighted by that, right? If you had if you had a job in a factory or a steel mill or an aluminum mill or something like that, and now that factory is closed, and a lot of towns relied on these factories in more remote areas and stuff like that, so they feel slighted by this idea of, like, free trade, right? So I think that's one reason that the thought is that if he places a tax on foreign aluminum, for example, it becomes more expensive. Those jobs are going to come home, right? I think that's what his belief is. I'm not saying it would happen, but that's what his belief is.
But would it not make more sense for him to start opening up more aluminum, like processing plants or mines, before just tariffing other countries that are giving them the resources that they need?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things like what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
So it's like right now, for example, we're just using aluminum as an example. A lot of aluminum in America comes from Canada, right? It comes out of Quebec and from northern Quebec, and right now you can buy that aluminum out of Canada for a competitive price, right? I would say cheaper than if it was made in the U.S. So even if someone was to open an aluminum plant, forget the time it takes to build it and staff it and actually find the aluminum like in the ground and mine it and do all that. So let's just say, that's, you're talking about years and billions of dollars in investment. But let's say, for example, somehow, there's a ferry that made this all appear overnight. You would still, the Canadian aluminum would be more competitive to buy. So because of that, it'd be hard to have that transition. So I think, the American consumer is going to feel some pain. But the idea, I'm not saying it will happen, but the idea is that eventually, things would be made and manufactured in the U.S. I think Trump is correct in the sense that you will see manufacturing and some of these industries return to the U.S. What I think he overlooks, or I think maybe doesn't care too much of, is that it's going to become astronomically more expensive, right? At the end of the day, Canada can produce more aluminum for better quality at a cheaper price just because we're good at it. We have it in our ground. We have all the factories in place. We have the staffing. We have the logistical network to move it. But you could start producing it in the U.S. However, it's going to be at a much higher cost, right? So now everything is going to go up. So I think that's what I'm sure he's aware of it, but maybe he neglects. I think another reason of the tariffs is that he sees, as I said, tariffs is a tax, right? And he sees it as a source of income for the United States, right? So all the goods that are being taxed is going to generate a lot of money, right? It's unfortunate that American consumers are going to be paying for it, but it's going to generate a lot of money for the government that I think he wants to use to pay for some of his more ambitious or more expensive campaign promises. So if I had to speculate what's going on in his mind, I think it's a combination of those. Dealing with the gripes of some people that have supported them in areas where they've lost manufacturing, they've lost production, and also generating income. Yeah. And
what do you think that's going to do to Canadian citizens as far as their economics?
Well, I think it's going to hurt Canada in the short run. I think it will hurt Canada. The reason being is that historically, Canada and the United States have had a very close economic relationship, right? And as a result of that, they have become a big customer for Canadian goods. A lot of our, raw materials, a lot of our goods flow to the U.S. The U.S. is a big consumer market. They consume a lot of things. They buy a lot of stuff. They need a lot of materials, and we're geographically close to them. We have a lot of the things that they need. So it's been a very economically beneficial relationship, right? So I think that's why Canada has become so intertwined and interdependent on the U.S. It's just easy to do. We've also given Americans great deals on things because they're good customers. For example, the oil coming out of Alberta is below market value. It was to be sold somewhere else. But because of that, we've become very independent. And all of a sudden, if now the cost of all these Canadian goods go up, the economic theory says that demand is going to go down, right? Less people are going to be buying those goods. And when demand goes down, the manufacturers in Canada will have no choice but to start laying people off because they just don't need as many workers. They don't need as much equipment to produce as much. More people that are laid off, we start to see, fewer people that can consume in an economy, and therefore you start to see an economy start to shrink, right? Which we would call a recession. So I would say that is probably the effect that we're going to see in Canada.
Yeah. So you're expecting a recession to kind of ensue eventually.
Yeah,
in the short term.
Yeah, if the tariffs stay, I think also, there's I forget the exact stat, but it's something like 36 or maybe 30. I don't know the exact stat off the top of my head, but a majority of the U.S. states, Canada is the number one trading partner with, right? So it's not just
huge.
So it's all over the country. It's not just the northern states. It's even in the southern states and all that stuff. So I think Trump is going to start facing immense pressure inside the U.S. to lift these tariffs, because as soon as tariffs come into place, Canada is going to implement counter tariffs, which is going to start hurting, the U.S. economy. And I think the tariffs, we still don't know what's going to be or the counter response. But if we can look back to Trump's first term, we kind of get a preview into what the government is thinking. And we saw during Trump's first term, when he tried to implement tariffs, that the Canadian counter tariffs were highly strategic. They were highly targeted towards swing states, towards maybe industries that have a lot of influence over Trump, and eventually he capitulated to that pressure. I think we're going to see a repeat of that playbook. We're going to see the Canadian government go after states that Trump needs to keep happy, especially when it comes up to midterm elections. I think they're going to go after industries that have a direct ear to the White House, and who knows how long he'll be able to resist that pressure. So there's a possibility that maybe something happens, it's not as long and protracted, and then it passes, like we saw during his first administration, where he put select tariffs in place. But who knows, right? Who knows what's gonna happen?
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that. So there's been some talk about interprovincial tariffs, and that's kind of the wrong term. It's not necessarily a tariff interprovincially, but just more so
like a trade barrier.
Yeah, a trade barrier.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people reference the trade barrier as a tariff, and it's not quite the same thing. So it would actually be nice that if Canada could work together through the provincial system and actually allow it to be easier for the provinces to do business with each other, because the government of Canada estimated that if you were to change the barrier to a tariff, it would be sitting around a 6.9% tariff between provinces, which is ridiculous because we're the same country.
Yeah.
So
interprovincial tariffs are one of those things that I remember reading about in history books, right? So like for 50 years, every different government said put it on their agenda, get rid of interprovincial trade barriers, and it hasn't seemed to manifest. But now I think we have a push like never before, and an alignment from the different provinces to get rid of some of these interprovincial barriers, and some of them are just on the books from a long time ago. Like, say for example, it is technically illegal to move alcohol between Ontario and Quebec, right? Just as an example. So that would be an example of an provincial trade barrier. So if you produce alcohol, because we have the LCBO, or earlier.
So it's more on the Ontario side that it's illegal to.
Well, because say for example, the LCBO was a centralized alcohol purchasing board, so they would purchase all. Like, now we have alcohol in convenience stores and other stuff, but when this originally came on the books, it was basically only alcohol purchased by the LCBO and lawfully sold to the LCBO was allowed to be in the province. So Quebec, that beers and wines were never part of their central control board. A lot of people would buy wine or beer or something in Quebec. Technically speaking, it was you're not supposed to cross that
bring
it back into Ontario, right? So I remember the last time I heard of someone being charged with moving a bottle of beer across Quebec or into Ontario. But
that's what you got.
Yeah.
Pinch for that.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be ideal, but that's an example of an interprovincial trade barrier, right? So
we even look at healthcare, right? When I lived in BC a few years ago, I got sick and I went to a walk-in clinic, and they're like, can we have your BC health card, whatever, and I showed them my Ontario one, and they're like, we don't take this. And there was a bit of a barrier there for me to get healthcare, and I was like, man, I'm in Canada, like, what?
Because healthcare falls on the provincial.
That was pretty crazy. I I didn't think that was going to be an issue,
Yeah.
but it was.
It was, yeah. But also, like, say for example, right now we're hearing about some of the issues in Alberta's health service system, right? And that's an example of, a province has set up a healthcare regime that is specific to that province, right? So, when another province tries to access it, they're unable to, right? So, yeah, interprovincial trade barriers are a way of finding new markets for some of the businesses that are going to lose customers that were in the US, right? Before, because of free trade, it was almost easier to sell a product in the US and for some industries, not all, but for some industries, than to sell it to, a neighboring province, for example. And now there's, as maybe some of those customers in the US are going to disappear, we're going to try and find them in other provinces. So I think that's one push. The other, and I'm an optimistic person. So the other thing is
Yes, you are.
yeah, Canada has, the resources that the world needs, right?
Yes,
It's not,
we do.
we have a lot of everything. And also we have, globally, relatively to the globe, a highly educated, productive workforce, right? Yeah. We can be more productive. I'm not saying we're the best and all that stuff, but our raw materials, coupled with our services that we offer, there's a demand globally, right? So it's a retooling and shifting that is going to see to get those materials and services to new markets to make up some of that U.S. loss. But there's a demand for those products. It's not like the U.S. is our only customer. They were probably the easiest customer historically, but now
As far as shipping goes, yeah. But
now,
I think Japan's been asking us for our natural gas for over a decade now, and we haven't been able to get them natural gas because we haven't opened up enough refining factories.
I mean, the world, Japan's one example, but the world as a whole needs everything that we have to offer. Because if anyone thinks back to their high school science classes, you open a periodic table and pick almost any element on that table, and it's in Canada somewhere. Yeah, it's in Canada somewhere, and all of our materials, everything, whether it's cars or even this microphone that we're talking, everything needs raw materials to be built and produced, right? So we have a lot of it. So I'm confident we will find other markets. It's just going to be a shift or a pain point to get there.
So that's interesting. Do you think Canada will, in the long run, come out stronger because of the tariffs? Like, is he almost forcing us to look inwards and start solving a lot of broken parts of our country, which when in repair, we're going to actually come out stronger?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some pain, but I think ultimately Canada will come out stronger, as a result of this. I think that has more to do with like the Canadian people than maybe something that's happening in the U.S. Because just call it over the last 30 days with these tariff threats, you've seen a surge in Canadian pride and Canadian unity. Look at what happened with the U.S. and Canada hockey game. 3 fights, 3 fights, 90 seconds, and then we go on to win, right? And it was a national pride moment. But this is I'd say that's the Canadian spirit. The reality is, you have this huge market with the U.S. that's along our border. We always had historically good relationship with the U.S. Both politically, geography, obviously the close proximity, but also militarily, we didn't have to have a big fortified border between the two countries because the countries got along. They were close. Right. They were close allies. So it made sense that they became such a big market, right? You're also talking I'm not saying every U.S. citizen, but the U.S. consumer, the average U.S. consumer is, one of the wealthiest on the planet compared to other countries, and consumes a lot, right? This is a market that, consumes a lot of goods. So it made sense that Canada developed this deep intertwined relationship with the U.S., but because of what's happening there, we're going to have to see a pivot. And, the world changes and countries react. Canada's no different. I do think we're going to come out stronger than before. And we are seeing, a lot of other countries, engage more with Canada, right? Especially in Europe and, in Asia and all that stuff. So, there's going to be some pain. I don't doubt it, but I think overall we'll be better for it.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see if other countries kind of stand up to help Canada by obviously purchasing what we have to offer and kind of supporting us, because I know that this is putting a lot of tension amongst everything else that Trump has been doing lately against the states. So it would be really nice to see if everybody else kind of rises to the occasion, we'll say, and helps.
Well, I think we're seeing, we're 5-6 weeks now into the second Trump presidency, and we're seeing, I think there's a pattern that's emerging, is that countries that were the previous, call it, closest friends to the U.S. are being attacked, right? I don't mean physically attacked, but economically and things like that. Some of the closest U.S. allies, and then countries that have historically been, call it, opposed to the U.S. are now being maybe a little bit more embraced, right? The other day in the UN, I think for the first time ever, the United States, North Korea, Iran, and Russia all voted together, right, on a Ukraine issue. But it's just an example of how there's a shift in U.S. policy between who was previous friend and who was previous foe. I'm all for making more friends in the world, but you don't turn your back on your previous friends, right? And Canada being the closest ally to the U.S., it seems that hasn't mattered in the treatment coming out of the Trump administration towards Canada. Mexico is also a close ally of the U.S. Different relationship, not as close as Canada, but still a close ally. Europe, for example, very close allies of the U.S. They're also seeing threats of tariffs and all this thing. So I think we're seeing amongst, call it, Western liberal democracies as a whole, that the U.S. is sort of turning on them, and when I say turning, taxing them is an example, right, of turning a tax onto them. So I do think that eventually there will be a coordinated response that goes beyond just Canada and the U.S. I think European allies and other countries will also join together, because we've seen the Trump administration turn tariffs threats to all of them. Right. Typically, imposing tariffs was something that was done on a foe, not a friend, right? So I do see. I think there will be a more international effort to combat these tariffs, right? Because I think Canada is the U.S.'s biggest trading partner. So what we do in terms of tariff responses will have the biggest impact on the U.S. But the U.S. is still a big economy; it's still a big market. But multiply that by a 10, 12, 15, 30 country response, and
you start having a problem.
You'll start having a problem, right?
Yeah.
And you're kind of already seeing, Trump implemented tariffs with China. A lot of goods in the U.S. are made out of China. So the U.S. consumer, even though it's 5-6 weeks, is already seeing upward pressure on pricing, right? And the more tariffs that come up, the more they're going to see that.
Man. Yeah. So how do you think the American people are feeling?
If I had to guess right now, I would say that, Elon Musk probably occupies more of their headspace and their, call it, what's on the news than what's happening in the tariff world, specifically with Canada. So I would say, if I was to guess, the average American, I wouldn't say maybe the average American, maybe not the most an informed American would, but the average American, probably it's not on their radar yet, right? It's just, I think, when you start to see prices rise, when you start to see things, escalate in pricing, that's when the average American consumer would probably tune in.
To notice, yeah.
So I think right now, I'm pretty sure well-informed Americans are paying attention. They are seeing what's happening. And we hear stories of Americans that are in Canada. And, I was watching the news the other day, and I think there was an American that was in a border town, maybe in Windsor, around there. And they bought lunch for everyone in the restaurant because they, as an apology of what was going on. Yeah. So there's still, we still see that close relationship, that friendship trying to weather this storm. But when prices start to rise, people start asking why, and it's going to be on because of tariffs, right? So
yeah, it's crazy. I would never have expected the states to kind of hit Canada in a way that would be, well, especially military, but economically, that seems so sneaky.
Yeah,
just being so close and having that relationship with them for basically the inception of our country.
Yeah,
and it's unfortunate because we bring a lot of good stuff to the table for them, and they do too for us. So.
Yeah, it's been one of the most prosperous relationships for both countries in history, right?
Yeah, there hasn't been another set of countries that have gotten together so well.
Yeah, and produce so much joint wealth for both parties, right?
Yeah.
So, and also stability, right? All that's like, there is. I'm not saying the border is perfect, but overall, in terms of, there's a lot of countries in the world that would trade their border issues for the border issues between Canada and the U.S. So it has been a prosperous relationship. There, it's not perfect, like any relationship. It evolves, it grows, and it tweaks. But I think this is the probably the largest shift that we've seen for the last time Canada and America had a spat was 1812. That was a long time ago. So I would say this is probably the largest shift.
It's due. We're due for a spat.
Yeah, since then. But we'll see how it all shakes out. But it's also not just Canada, right? It's I think all U.S. allies are examining their relationship with the U.S. right now, right? Versus how they previously did things.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that just one guy can come in and make such devastating changes and pretty much destroy, what a country has built over its lifetime as far as, friendships and allies. Just come in and just decimate all of it.
Yeah, well, Canada survived the first Trump presidency. I'm confident it will survive this one. But there is, the fact that Trump was reelected and this stuff is happening is an indication that there is a sentiment in the U.S. that is brewing, right? And I think I think Trump is a manifestation of some of that stuff, but I don't think it's gonna go away when Trump does, or if Trump does.
You're right. So basically, you're saying that the people feel the way that Trump feels. And so therefore,
well, there's enough of them that elected him, right? And whether who knows if Trump leaves office or doesn't, that's like a whole other issue. But I think that this is a re-examining of the role that America plays in the world and how Canada has to respond, being their closest ally. We'll see. We're in an interesting time in history.
Yeah, I gotta ask because I would love to your opinion on what. I almost don't want to ask, but what is your opinion on Canada becoming the 51st state?
Comment. I was gonna say I don't think Canada will ever become the 51st state. I think I think Canada would go to war before becoming the 51st state. I would go to war for Canada.
They took all of our guns, though.
Before.
What are you going to use? A pencil?
Well, there was this is one interesting stat, but at the end of World War II, Canada had the second largest navy and the third largest air force in the world. So when Canada needs to respond to its call on the global stage, it always has, right? And I think right now, I don't think Trump is joking about these 51st state comments. I think that he is serious. I don't think that he is going to push it to the point of military conflict, right? So I could be wrong, but that is my thought. So I do think that it's not going to become that serious. But yeah, I don't think that Canada should or ever would become the 51st state. The Canadian identity, we are very close with Americans. They are, I would say, our best friends. But part of the Canadian identity is not being American, right?
Yes,
that is distinctly, we are distinctively different in that way. And it shows in how our two countries have differed, right? In terms of fundamental policies that we have both globally as well as internally in our like, say for example, certain Canadian values like healthcare and all that stuff. It shows the difference of our two countries. So we have a lot of similarities. We're close friends, but yeah, I don't think we'd ever become the 51st state. I don't think we should. I think that just these comments show the Canadian unity that has arisen. But I also don't think Trump's joking, right? Like I think that he
doesn't. I don't know if he's a joker.
I don't think so. When we talk, say for example, right now, if you were to add up all the natural resources in the U.S., right, that's gold, diamonds, oil, nickel, anything, right, potash, everything that the U.S. has, and you add up everything that Canada has in terms of critical minerals, Canada is a wealthier country, right? We have in the magnitude of trillions of dollars of more natural resources than the U.S. So I think Trump looked at a map, or someone told him this information, and he realized that everything that the U.S. would need consumer wise is located in Canada. And to build anything, to produce anything, you have all of it here, right? And right now we're hearing about this critical mineral deal with Ukraine, and whether it's going to be signed or not signed or whatever, but all those critical minerals are in Canada as well.
Yeah.
So historically, I think U.S. presidents, both Democrat, Republican, have looked at Canada and said, this is our ally. We've always had a close relationship. We have a great trading relationship. They will get us and give us what America needs in order to succeed. But Trump has looked at that relationship and said, well, we can just take it and be a 51st state. So yeah, I was gonna say that it's not happening that we're gonna become a 51st state.
No, I think there would be one hell of a war if that was the case.
Yeah. I was, the majority of Canadians don't want to be the 51st state. You're always going to find some yahoo that's going to say, yeah, it's a good idea. But yeah, the majority don't. And I think that's a good thing for our country to be separate from the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, even when you travel, you can go somewhere and say, yeah, we're Canadian. And you get a different level of respect.
Yeah.
And I know, when we were in Costa Rica for my wedding, we went on a tour. Yeah, you were there, and he's like, we were joking, saying, "Oh, we're gringos," and he's like, "No, you're not."
Yeah, you're Canadian.
Yeah, and we were like, "What?" He's like, "No, you're not gringos. So that's for Americans."
Yeah,
it's like, you're Canadian.
Yeah, different. Yeah,
just different.
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh man, that's pretty cool." Like, it was some sort of sense. It was a sense of pride being acknowledged outside of your country. That
and that happens the world over, right?
Yeah.
So and Canada is a very different country, and I think that we should remain that. We should remain that way.
I agree. I think we have a really good independence, and we should keep it as long as we can.
Yeah. So I think one thing to also note is, what can people individually do on like a personal level when seeing staring down the threat of tariffs. So I think one thing is well, I would say there's probably 3 recommendations I would give to people. So one thing is looking at your own personal finances, right? When you're going into a more difficult time, I almost say it's like getting ready for a storm, right? You want to stock up on supplies and all that stuff. You want to do the same sort of financial health check for yourself. And the biggest thing you can do is probably get rid of your consumer credit card debt, right? It doesn't matter what you're investing in, what you're working, what you're doing. You're never going to beat a 19 or 21% interest rate. It's just the math will never break in your favor. So when you're worried about maybe your job or what's going to happen when tariffs are around, paying off that consumer debt is really going to help put you ahead to be able to weather a storm. I would say the other thing is also look at what you're buying, right? Buying locally, buying Canadian is going to help you avoid those tariffs, right? So those items aren't going to be as expensive. And sometimes some simple substitutes can definitely help, not break the bank, especially when you're in the grocery store or when you're shopping. Say, for example, instead of buying Kentucky bourbon, buying Canadian whiskey will avoid those will avoid some of those tariffs, right? So that's another thing that you can do. And I would say the third thing is sort of keep an even keel, right? There's always going to be ups and downs and good times and bad. Just keep in mind that this will pass. Set a plan, stick to it. Set a plan, stick to it, and that will help people weather the storm through the tariffs.
Yeah, man, that's good advice. We're seeing, especially in our professions, we see a lot of people struggling. It's just an uphill battle with credit card debt and trying to make those payments. Yeah. But being able to consolidate those payments, get them down to something that's way more manageable, put cash back in their pocket every month is really, it really helps get through hard times, knowing that you're not wasting money. Yeah. You have that extra bit of cash for if something does go wrong, and groceries increase by another 36%. You're not paying interest on that grocery bill, right? Exactly.
Yeah. It's like running a marathon. Some people are gonna, when you're carrying credit card debt, it's like trying to run a marathon with like 100-pound bag on your back, right? Even if you get rid of half of that, running that marathon with a 50-pound bag is going to be easier. It doesn't matter where you're going, what the weather is, who else is in the marathon. It's just going to be easier when that bag becomes a 50-pound, that 100-pound bag becomes a 50-pound bag, right? Yep. And if you can get rid of it completely, you're going to be even better, right? So yeah, and it's the low hanging fruit. You don't have to be a financial wizard, or you don't just attacking that credit card debt.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put some stuff together and throw it in below the video so that people can check it out, and we'll do some financial advice for them too to help them try and get through this storm and come out on the other side. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, man. I'll cheers you to that.
Cheers. Yeah.
And we'll do another one eventually.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll do a different topic. I'm sure there'll be some other crazy thing coming out of the White House too.
Oh yeah.
To talk about.
There will be no such shortage of interesting topics with him in power.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.